Okay.
Poetry here at UC Berkeley. I'm the curator of the Mixed Blood Project and the fall curator of the Halloween Poetry Series, along with Jim Gregory. The Mixed Blood Project invites to campus very good poets interested in talking about the intersections of the languages of race and the languages of poetic innovation. Today I'm pleased to welcome Ronaldo Wilson, author of Farther Traveler, Poems of the Black Object, and The Narrative of the Life of the Brown Boy and the White Man. His talk today is titled Drawing, the Body at Play, the Mind Holding Fat. And Ronaldo will be giving a reading this evening at 6:30, preceded by a concert at 6 o'clock by Positive Knowledge. So please, the whole afternoon, early evening of wonderful stuff. So please welcome Ronaldo Wilson.
So thank you, Cecil, and thanks for having me here. Can you hear me okay? Okay, so I won't do too much. I just wanted to say that look at this little timer's going. I don't know what's happening with that timer. You don't see it. So I have been working on a few things, particularly this summer in working through drawing a lot. You know, fine art, sort of making drawings, and you'll see. So I wrote this talk around this, and this is all very new. And I hope that the slides will work, because I wanted to show you some work that speaks to it. So, and I use these occasions often, these lectures, to sort of think about really these drafts for other projects. The last talk I gave here in the Bay Area was the Leslie Scalpino lecture, and I wrote about an event, and I talked about this event. And eventually it found its way into, was it like LBGQ, the magazine out of Duke, that's right. So hopefully this will kind of find its way as well. And I will say that what I wanted to talk about in this paper, which was another event, it's kind of like, you know, Cecil mentioned that I was interested in the intersection between race and sexuality or race, and the series speaks to that particular thing. So the talk was really about an event, a kind of a little racist exchange, a little kind of like a number of exchanges that happened, but I didn't really get to them in the talk, which I might, given I'm so late and so hot, I will try to talk about a little bit of it. It's not an excessively long talk, but it does ask you to think with me through a number of things. I'm happy to take questions at the end, and hopefully I can kind of stop and move through some of these slides. So it begins with a quote, and it could have ended with this quote either, or this quote could constantly be moving, and I think this is something that some of us who are in academia know very well. It's a quote by Guillermo Gomez Peña, the performance artist and critic. He says, paradoxically, certain nationalist and essentialist sectors, many humorless activists and academicians have become guardians of solemnity. They have forgotten that humor is profoundly political. So you're all supposed to start laughing, stare at them like that. See, see. Let me premise this talk by pointing out that this is more an artist statement than a lecture, or an artist statement as a way of moving through some recent works on paper, in the body, as the body, on video, exercises in the imagination, through quick sketches, longer drawings, and very recent thinking through the backdrop to the self-information, or the larger category of self-fashioning as a way of moving through some ideas about representation and its recovery, both through methodology and document. Much of my preoccupations lately in writing and in art have to do with capturing the body at play. The body in the world as document, the document of the black body that is often captured, violated, and by extension the same body and field as a site of violation. In a recent or not so recent meditation, which was then a dissertation and now becoming a kind of critical book project, what's wrong with this formation? Everything. So what I mean to say a kind of artist's critic's book, one that will need lots of funding. I traffic in images, color and performance practice documentation. One that advanced pretty far along in one fellowship contest, making some rounds, making it through the rounds. But alas, what's wrong with this formation? Or what might be right about pursuing the project, not as mode of contribution to the field, later losers, snoozers, but rather a stream of convulsion, a spasm, a breaking point into a map. Or what the poet Mina Alexander called a few weeks ago when we talked about my diss, that's the kind of street cred name for dissertation, my diss. In New York over, she says it like Prosecco. After the fact, an invisible scaffold, she called my diss. There are many ways to think about the nature of this structure, the pull of the project, and of course its multiple projections. I'll just kind of dog-ear this, and I work with graduate students, and I'm sort of trying to put a boycott on the word project. What's your project? I'm interested in what's your desire. What are you projecting? What are you thinking about? Do not say what your project is. You will get slapped. But for the sake of thinking of a way, lovely, slap like gently or hard, depending on the hand. But for the sake, or the mind, right? But for the sake of thinking of a way into the convulsion, the impulse that drives the project, I'd like to recenter the work of Ellen Gallagher, the painter and conceptual artist. Gallagher is indeed mostly known as a painter, but I think that the way that she describes the condition of the violated black body as a site of what I think of as possibility, new roots, the generative as helpful for all of my activities as a scholar, poet, and ultimately as I'm growing into this self more directly as an artist. I'm like the person formerly known as a professor, just like be a sign. I've written about Gallagher's work fairly closely for a number of years, and I should say Francis Richard is in the room. He's a really wonderful poet and art critic who we probably met. You might have known Ellen Gallagher of her work before I did, but I know I met Ellen. Hi, Balaji. I met Ellen Gallagher and Ellen Gallagher's work, at this time when we were, sort of running around the Provincetown in 1999 or 98 or so, 1999. I've written about Gallagher's work fairly closely for a number of years and pair her art primarily with the poetry of Gwendolyn Brooks. I explore specifically her early paintings, Host, first in relation to the long poem cycle, A Bronzeville Mother Loiters in Mississippi, Meanwhile a Mississippi Mother Burns Bacon. And I thought about this title, actually, I thought about Don Lundy Martin's A Gathering of Matter, A Matter of Gathering, too. I wondered about that, sort of how those two works are speaking to one another. Do you know this? Do you know Don Lundy Martin? She is one of my performance mates. She's wonderful books. Life in a Box is a Pretty Life. It's her latest. Meanwhile, the Mississippi Mother Burns Bacon and its bloody, windy tale work, the last quatrain of the Ballad of Emmett Till, and venture through some of the scholarship of Jacqueline Goldsby, Elizabeth Alexander, June Jordan, and others. I am most interested in the work's rupture. Brooks is breaking through most acutely through my imagination in a later poem, Boy Breaking Glass, in which she writes, I shall create, if not a note, a whole, if not an overture, desecration. For me, this is the epicenter. I'm not interested in thinking of any origin but this one right now. A way of thinking around the question of presenting the site of abstraction, the violated black body, as the site of organization itself, through the chaos or its realization, Fanon's spattered black blood, Wangechi Mutu's exploding tree, branches, bodies. In a recent film I saw at the Venice Biennale, her piece called The End of Carrying All, which is described by Intense Art magazine, also I Am, I just discovered this, they're a cool magazine, right? An African woman walks the earth while collecting more than was necessary with every step of the passage. Eventually engulfed by the weight of all she's acquired, she mutates into lava and erupts. So you gotta see this film if you get a chance to see Mutu's works. A fabulous painter, but I just saw this stuff on film. And it's just, I noticed something about Venice Biennale too. It's curated by Okwuezinor. First time it's been curated by an African artist. This is a big international exhibit in Venice. And I just noticed how this black art was just sort of teeming with people. You know, people were around it, in it, with it. You know, they'd stopped and just really, and I thought about that, you know. And I could also recognize when there was a black artist happening. And I thought, well, that's black art. I kind of knew. I wondered about that too. What sort of discerned that? And I think it has something to do with this very question of the kind of one's relationship to the chaos. I'm thinking here of Adrian Piper's Mythic Being series, extending beyond each photographic plate, mantra, and subsequent paintings and related video work, Coronered, and other installation pieces. Still relevant today in making the space for the conceptual body as formation, argument, and redress. William Pope L's Whole Theory, his Capro Yard project, recent performances and lectures on diversity in the museum. And I saw him recently, William Pope L, give a lecture. I was not able to, well, he has he's having a show, the sort of last installation of a new show is at the Yerba Buena, I think this Saturday or next Saturday or something. So anyway, I'm dying to see that, but I went to this diversity talk. I thought about humor, and he and his colleagues, he came out in a giant cow suit to talk about diversity. Someone came out as a chicken. I just love that. I was like, you've solved everything. You've solved all the world's problems. Come to my committee on affirmative action and diversity in your cow suit. So, these are the artists that I'm thinking about, mostly because they figure out a way to cast the experience of representation through the conceptual imagination, and have been doing so in such a way they offer a promising way to think of space, race, and the imagination. What is the archive of this project? My own projections, my relationship to how the framing, perhaps framing is not the right word. Perhaps here I might be thinking of the destruction of the contents in the frame. Not the sequence, the list, the lineage, but something else. The need to think of a way back into the desecration. Gallagher, and you know, there's Audrey Rensh's diving into the wreck, which I'm thinking about, which I wonder if it's quite different. You know, there's a sort of, you know, assumption of a dive, the dive versus the fall, you know, falling on your face when you think you've arrived. Which, as I would like to put next to that, which is maybe the same thing. Gallagher, early on in her work, describes the process of her relationship with the black body. And she says, I'm thinking about the spatial relationship between bodies. The content in the work is not sequential, but spatial. So often black bodies have been materially and physically constricted, and I think that I'm less interested in locating being inside the body, this is Helen Gallagher, of course, in order to make the point that being doesn't only exist inside the body. Like most Americans, I'm obsessed with captivity, but this is not a slave narrative. It's after the explosion. The fracture has already happened. And again, you know, if anyone has, you know, sort of traveled through any of my scholarship, it's a very important, you know, moment for me, important work. And but I often think of it, how do you return to it, you know, post-dis, critical art project, you know, what are you doing with these things? How are you returning? I am, at this point, at some remove from this project, as a work that attempts to totalize some notion of the violated black body, which we see a lot of, right? You know, sort of banking on the violated black body, which is a, you know, interesting kind of possibility. To carve on my own unique relationship to its formation for the Academy or some other such audience, but more interested in what drives me to keep writing into the formation of the idea itself. And even though this is not a talk on Ellen Gallagher, it might be helpful to share what it is that I first saw in these works, and more particularly what it meant for me to understand a way of thinking of the black body. What is and isn't my own, see multiple races, multiple feelings, which we all are, hello, multiple characters, genres, and media, in relationship to its mark, both static and secure, rendered in all ways, at least for me, as slippery as it is fraught. But then and now Gallagher's work, Gallagher's work helps me to think of questions of race and representation, race and performance, race and conceptual visual thinking. Blubber, and this is a detail of Blubber, you know, taken from the little dissertation folder I had. Blubber was one of the first paintings of Ellen Gallagher's that I saw, which I think was at the temporary old MoMA space at the PS1 in Queens. I'd met Ellen a year or so, and I don't remember the show, but it's like all these artists. What is this show, Francis? You just know, like the PS1 always has this big retrospective of artists, like 3 or 4 artists, or 3 or 4 paintings by each. Anyway, it's a big deal at PS1 that happened. And that was also, I think, at the time when MoMA was moving. It was at this big, I don't know if it was PS1, is it like that big galleries in Queens? Maybe it's not PS1.
There were two of them. I can't think what they were called, but they were like sort of Brooklyn Now kind of.
Yeah. Yeah, you remember, huh? Oh my God, I wore this great shirt to this. I was so tiny I could fit into this thing. I met Ellen a year or so before '99, and I was taken by the fact that she was working with such care and was writing as though it were a visual language about, through, under, outside of race and its signs, the experience that the art critic Thirza Goody would eventually call Gallagher's own cosmology. But I am still struck by one moment in particular, when the poet Nick Flynn saw Hot Dogs and Eggs, where I saw some serious Sambo faces. Hungry? In fact, in her early works are revealed obsessive repetitions of a slippery kind of black fragmented body, a variety of minstrel images, coon eyes, bugged out lips, but she complicates this with a number of other forms of blonde bodies, wigs, flips that appear blasted onto the canvas, a side of the imagination, hers, ours? How is linearity disrupted? Fast forward to how the works move from the wall to sculpture. And this is such early work, and I'm just talking through this work. I won't show it to you because I want to show some other work. I'll show a small version here of Preserve at some point. To film, magazine collages, printed newspapers, ebony jet among them, and now also at the Venice Biennale, a return to the wall. Canvas and penmanship paper, but this time everything in a kind of light blue wash, which is like the 2014 or 2015. So there's this huge arc of work. I mean, what I'm talking about are these little science travel, and in earlier works, this penmanship paper was, you know, really flat across it was almost like an Agnes Martin grid sort of thing she was doing, and then later they become cutouts and they move and they shape, and then she moves into different material like painting and, sculpture and film and installation work, all these kinds of things, which for me as an artist was inspiring as a thinker. And this does make sense given that the exhibition before this at the Whitney, I think in 2013, was so grounded with both the deep ocean, which is a theme in her work, as well as the sky, birds. I saw so many birds, ornate Japanese no-time style cutouts of fish, coral, installations of the sea, haunting soundscapes, under the title, Don't Axe Me, A-X-E, me, Don't Axe Me. As background today, I thought that it might be helpful to look at a slide or two of Gallagher's earlier works. This one in particular, and it's funny, I didn't think of this, it's called Blubber. I didn't think of this in relationship to the talk, the body I played, the mind-holding fat. But suddenly, it just came, you know, came to me in a dream, a greasy dream. I swear I did not think of this before I started writing this talk, but I think maybe I've been carrying this around in my imagination since the late 90s when I first saw this image. And the artist helped me to think of questions of race and spatiality, what it means to be alive in the space of the explosion, desecration, as joy, the body on the move, the pieces floating into some occasion of the self, realized through this disparate matter. But how do I reflect upon this realization now on the run, it seems? You know, I'm on the run to be read, particularly lately. Or maybe this has always been the case. I've been thinking about how to capture through my work the very capaciousness of subjectivity. How does the race, sexualized body begin to be read and read itself, Poems of the Black Object, and how within this space might one begin to track not the end result of this formation, but rather the space of the blur, the gesture, the mark that discerns one's presence, being the threat, the erasure, say, farther traveler. One of the things I think about in this quest is the ways that conceptual analysis, and by extension conceptual art making, whether poetry, drawing, video, and art, is open and at once always corporeal. Eileen Miles, I don't know why I'm doing this in these essays, but I think they're pretty crazy. Eileen Miles, though she did once ask me if I was a worker at a party at FAWC, Fine Arts Work Center, where I cooked her baked chicken and noodles with the fiction writer Amanda Kim. Is still super adventurous in her observations of the body, mind, living poet, artist in space. Maybe I did look like the chef or the server that day. Perhaps it was a kind of performance I was engaged in, to cook, to serve, you know, the eagerness of being a young poet, you know, all bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, and then to be asked, do you work here? Which, you know, I was angry at some point, but then, you know, now I'm 45 years old, I was not so angry anymore. I was like, wow, what did I look like? I must have looked so, you know, so like together. I must have looked like I could cook it all, you know, make it all. You know, I must have been so ready and alert. And is to be a server, is that, you know, is that a pejorative, really? When in fact, it's not, right? But I will return to this in another essay, I think. I made it anyhow, right? She writes, Miles writes, describes poetry in this way in The Lesbian Poet, which I think is helpful. You aestheticize when you get to an edge. In the poem, you're turning around, she says, the flickering lights, the fading line, re-interrupting 1/4 inch down, unpredictable and rude. But here I am also thinking of the penultimate scene, just work. I don't even know if this works, but please do. Oh, yeah. So, oh, it didn't even come out great. It's all blurry. I just snatched it from somewhere. It should be clear, but that's all right, the blur. I'm thinking of the penultimate scene of the original Alien starring Sigourney Weaver when Bishop, Sigourney Weaver's android synthetic friend ally, is split in half by the mother alien's steel protuberance. And his blood, white, is everywhere. And you'll just go online and look at this, you know, and maybe you've seen the movie, maybe it's really old, you don't care about Sigourney Weaver or aliens, but I just was thinking about this all of my life, you know. It was so scary, this scene, this white blood, it stuck with me. I suppose there was pain and not pain, a way of understanding the site of violation, the violated body, white blood, white people, you know, in relation to what was possible in understanding its representation, the expanse of what is unexpected inside, some kind of white matter. Not blood, not milk, maybe paint, or in my case, pastels. I don't know if this is going to work, but I'm just going to like... That's Earth. I have it all sequenced out. You know, this is a draft, so just bear with me. Those aren't pastels, actually. That's ink, and ink on paper, and that's in my third book, these drawings. What can save you? It is light. Make a painting in all black with white surfaces to represent the ginger, Dad. Let me see if I can find what I'm talking about here. These are my drawings I've been doing like for all summer. I'm just committing to, and there's one drawing in particular I wanted you to see. It's this one coming up. This is the one I'm talking about. I was trying to like draw this guy, and I realized I couldn't do it anymore, so I had to work in black. Go figure. And then oh, okay, I can get something out of this guy. So I'm just learning. And so here I am, right? I'm certain that I'm missing steps here in my analysis. Perhaps this entire talk is a kind of misplacement, a way of avoiding the reactionary, which I'm so over right now. The side of realization, that certainly comes from following the rhetorical lead, the lines of the self that understands its direct relationship between lineage and understanding, a genealogy that marks the space of the body's performance under someone else's care or motivations. But insofar as I'm interested in the question of the black body's performance as desecrated, expanded body, a space after the explosion too, I'm also interested in the space of the gesture. What happens when one cannot record the actual picture, the facts, what fragments are left, and how to gather them into the body of one's own analysis, one's own art and performance, and what will you draw your final lines around. So I'm just going to sort of talk through these at the same time. Maybe I'll show you that little video if I can get that to work, but I wanted to show you some of the not earlier sketches in my career as someone making drawings, but this summer, you know, I'll show you some like really early things that were happening. It's kind of early. You know, this person was like fascinating, leaving, coming. I didn't figure out what was she doing. She's kind of weird. So I had to get that face, you know. But it's just this idea I realized that suddenly when you're working out in public, you know, people just disappear. You know, they get up, you know, you're sort of lost. You know, you make friends with them in space, and then suddenly they move, and you're like, hold still. But you know, so most of my drawings, this is a little bit later when someone was sitting there, as a little mixed kid, I thought a little black-white mixed kid was eating all this ice cream, traveling the country with his grandma. You know, it's kind of interesting. But, so I was just trying to, you know, work with these different, you know, drawings. So this is an example of, I think, what I'm getting at, you know, like when someone leaves, right? When someone's gone or fleeting. Often when I present, who is the record for? What is the process of making the record for? Who is the record for? What is the process in making the record? Of revealing which shapes to whom, of being led through the space of the body and its concomitant relationship to the text, at least in how it is represented, documented, and found in ways that are familiar or promise a line of argumentation. So sketch. That is to say, how might the making of the work, making poetry, painting, and I do these other things, sound pieces, the layering of the work of text, say in paintings, say in paintings, or in poems, or in essays that lead to another kind of logic of being. Isn't there something more? A colleague of mine, the love and post-colonial scholar, Balashny gave me some Saidiya Hartman to ponder as I constructed this essay. And I think she did this because she's quite familiar with some of my drawings and poetry. I'm just going to go to this one, which I think she's most familiar with. But you'll see, and I want to talk a little bit about working with these images in the essay. But so you saw this other one. So this is kind of a one, sort of really highly rendered, piece. And this is like hours of labor. The other ones are fast, just like a few minutes, and it's half an hour, whatever. But this is like long. Right? This is at the table, just dealing with it. She's quite familiar with some of my drawings. I thought I just showed one or two of here, and poetry around the pieces that I constructed in 2003 in conjunction with a class. This is interesting on how to do things with words and other materials at the Kinney Graduate Center. This is Eve Sedgwick taught this course. It's like a drawing, an art-making class, how to do things with words and other materials. And it's a major theorist. We just go to her house or studio and we just draw and make art. It's lovely. I was like, oh, that's the kind of professor I want to be. Come over. Let's make words, make art. And a month-long residency at the Jurassic Artist Colony. So even then in graduate school, I was traveling between doing this workshop and also at the Jurassic. I don't know how I was doing both of them. So, and Jurassic is very near you in Santa Cruz Mountains. After a conversation that we had around the relationship between still life, and we're talking about Balashny and the work of this sort of archive, or within this conversation, I'm thinking about the space of the living or life drawings, live sketches, and how in a way, so too alive are my drawings of the dead, or the dying, or the living, in particular, and how they help me to learn line, shadow, material, perspective. So I say a little something about training, but I will say that I learned to really draw, really as an adult, dealing with these lynching images. I wonder what that means also, to gain one's hand through working with these images. This is, what does it mean to honor them, to really sit and look, and the question people would ask is, I can't believe you're looking at those images, it must be so hard. And I was like, well, not really. Actually, it's hard to render them, but there's something that happens in looking at the drawing, which hopefully maybe we can talk about. But this comes up, I think, in a larger question that I'm asking here. Often when I present my work, I'm asked whether or not I'm trained. Whether it is my drawing, sound pieces, dance, or song, I'm often asked about this training. At first, I used to think I wasn't trained, that what I made came naturally, but in a sense I practiced a lot, drawing on my own, dancing in clubs and in the garage, my own, not the famous club, The Garage. Though I did dance a lot at Boy Bar in New York, Faces in Sacramento, and assorted clubs that I traveled as a grad student, and I used to be a b-boy, and of course I watched a ton of Fame. Hey, Leroy! The dancer, choreographer, and dance scholar Esther Baker Tarpaga reminded me a few summers ago at the Headlands Institute that the mirror and the bar are not the only way to train. That clubs count, and all of what you do is training. What is one's relationship to training and practice? This is a question that I've been thinking about in relation to what constitutes a mode, or perhaps even a methodology, for capturing the archive, to work into the space of life through the archive. But for me, it's ephemera, waste, the edges, life, I'm thinking here both of Gwendolyn Brooks' autobiographies, Report from Part 1 and Report from Part 2. Two conceptual projects that I wish these folks would be talking about. Two conceptual projects that help situate the reader of poetry in the world of Brooks' practices, habits, observations, and reports around poetry and life, I think. In this sense, what I'm after in my work attempts to understand obliteration and violation, not as the source of dead record or material through which to perfect my craft, but instead a kind of foundation for aesthetic discovery. Perhaps much more than recovery, or to train you how to behave or to think. Oh, no. Much more than recovery, or to train you how to behave or to think. That is a YP, not an MP. Do you know what that means? That is your problem, not my problem. My work is not meant to train you or discipline you into thinking about race and behaving in a particular way. You know, it's not. So I realize that's a kind of an aesthetic that I'm working through. It's not my job. You know, I do not want to hold that mantle up. Do not, you know, don't even ask. Hartman, as she is known for, seems to be writing against this kind of archive, I think. She points out that the archive in this case, and she's talking about, sorry, I skipped a paragraph. Though I only have just begun to look at Hartman's Venus in two acts, I'm taken by her consideration of the archive of the body of Venus as recurring trope, idea, figure, ubiquitous, however much so of silence. An archive of the record that does not say who she is, but is rather a purpose, a mode which is, quote, about the violence, the excess, the mendacity, and reason that seized hold of their lives, transformed them into commodities and corpses. Hartman is, as a, you know, so you'll get the reference now, as she is known for, seems to be writing against this kind of archive. She points out that the archive in this case, a death sentence, a tomb, a display of the violated black body, an inventory of property, medical treatise on gonorrhea, a few lines about a whore's life, the asterisk in the grand narrative history. Given this, it is doubtless impossible to ever grasp these lives again in themselves as they might have been in a free state. I understand there are several problems with what I'm at least currently attempting to think through via Hartman, Gallagher, Brooks, and others here. And in a way, my work has not necessarily been through the language of connection, as much as it is a language that attempts to explore the notion of a free state, right? So I mean, what I'm trying to say is I'm not necessarily invested in the kinds of you know, lineages that lead one to the realization of the value of an archive, but rather, how do we, what's the sort of giddiness or pleasure around dealing with these archives? What's the kind of free state? What is freedom, really? You know? I understand there are several problems with what I'm at least currently attempting to think through here. In a sense, I'm thinking here of tension, contradiction, failure, sadness, pain, vehicles that help not only to mediate power, but it is the same source that, for me, that energizes the work of art and art making, whether performance, drawing, poetry, and dance, and being in the world. In this sense, what I'm engaged in is the role of art and poetry as a means through which to think about what's possible, the free state, as opposed to thinking there really is any sort of epistemic center that does not arise from the very bodies and our minds from which these extend, thank you very much, rather than pursue my reaction to current Facebook and other immediate forms of redress, annoying, around conceptualism, annoying, and its effects, white versus black, equally annoying. I want to return to those who are helping me to think of ways to actually render this mode through a certain kind of freedom. And again, it's sort of like choosing your genealogies and choosing sort of reaction time, you know, what you want to react to. And I realized, well, you know, obviously I have certain opinions about things that are going on, but you know, when you're drawing, it's just like, you know, it's a different thing that's happening. I think that, you know, that really asks of you to observe, and I don't know, it just changes me, I guess. And it also points me to into different directions. Guillermo Gomez Peña, in conversation with Roberto Cifuentes, has been helping me a lot, particularly in thinking of ways to approach art through polysemantic, this is Lisa Walford's insertion here, modes, reminding me of the space for possibility in performance art, and that performance art utilizes a very complex set of communication strategies. Gomez Peña goes on to say that the work works from the inside, that there seems to be no immediate reaction, or at least the space for it. In their work, they point out that the, quote, ultimate goal is to look for images that will create a disturbing sediment in the consciousness of the spectator, images that will haunt them in dreams, in conversations, and in memories. So, yeah, that's sort of all I got to in the structure. There are a couple other movements that I want to work through, but actually I wanted to, and then there's a coda, which I have to write, which maybe I'll just tell you about. You know, because I haven't written it yet, but I think that's a pretty good foregrounding for what I'm trying to get at. And what I'm writing around actually maneuvers around these particular images, and I'll just walk you through some of them. Would that be helpful? You know, I'll just show you, like, look, so I talked about these images. These are, as I walk through them, I'll kind of maybe talk about the event that happened, and then we'll have some Q&A, and then, you know, maybe I'll show some video that's in here, that's embedded in here, which is all new. And I'll kind of show you what I'm getting at. And particularly around questions like, what is the shape you're working in? A colleague of mine named Anjali Arendakar's partner, Lucy Burns, is a dramaturg that saw some of the video and asked me what shapes I'm interested in. And I started thinking, well, you know, actually, I'm actually really, you'll see, I'm just trying to cover that up because it's ugly and it's a lot more. You know what I mean? And then, but it does make a shape, right? But it's like I'm actually trying to work out, and then at one point in the video, my husband now, he opens the door, and you got 10 minutes to get ready. It's like, it's not that deep in a way. You know, I'm sort of thinking about, or it is that deep, right? So I'm just gonna maybe, I don't have to read anymore. I can just walk you through certain drawings. So these pieces are sort of the earlier ones that I did this summer, and I was just kind of, again, experimenting with the sort of fleeting idea of gesture. I just also know that these are gonna look really interesting when they're blown up. I just thought, so the colors are gonna look good. And I thought, but then I learned a lot about this guy, because I learned from this guy something about, it doesn't matter what image you catch, it's the gesture, right? And then you get the sense of it, or there's something about the watercolors allow for gesture and that sort of making. And then I was thinking about experimenting with text. And I'm trying to deal with race here, and this is black woman I'm drawing here. And I don't know why, it's a basic black admiring an animal or not. I don't know what I was trying to do. I thought I would try to be clever with language and save my drawings, but then I realized you can't. You know, you just can't, you just gotta do it. And then I thought, oh, you know, let me just deal with this temporary image. And this is, I'm working in, primarily in pen, pastel, water, sometimes tea, but generally just like trying to figure out stuff early, and very shy with paint and stuff. And this is this work, as I was thinking about, you know, what I want to do with these drawings. Am I going to have a statement? And this is, I was out with me and Alexander, we're walking, and I said, oh, this portrait of you, you know. And in a sense, I'm trying to figure out a way to return to life studies, both in the hand and the water, so much around death. Yeah, I started thinking about my obsession with working with these dead bodies and how liberating it was drawing people who were alive in the world. And white people are interesting. Interesting subjects, white people are. You know, how color interacts with, you know, people of color. I started thinking a lot about color. You know, it's rare that you see black people where I go, actually in Long Island, or you know, it's like a rare sighting. It's important to capture gesture, maybe more than what's real. I was trying to work through. These are just notes to myself to kind of keep things together. And these, of course, are very, very fast. And then I had this idea that I was going to do portraits. I thought all summer I would do portraits. But then I thought, well, I have some self-portraits that are amazingly interesting, but I didn't show them. I won't have them. They're big, too. So I never painted in anything really large. So I started working in, now, maybe this big a painting. I'm working in these bigger pieces now, and I can sort of hold the representation. So, you know, and I'm going to have a solo exhibit in a museum in St. Louis, which I'll talk about. But I don't know when. We're just talking about it. So I'm excited about that. And this is, I'm having lunch with my friend Dawn Martin at the Hamptons. I was waiting for her. And so I'm drawing these, and you know, and then there's this black figure that comes in. And then I started thinking about, like, you know, space. I started thinking about, like, how do you record, you know, language in these spaces? What's being said in certain environments, and you'll see the difference. What kind of fruits and stuff do you put in it? Wow. And so, you know, I was pretty happy with this. I don't know why, I just felt it felt right. I don't really have a language for it other than, you know, I was always happy when this is like embarrassing. Because I thought, I'm gonna do like a real still life, and it's horrifying. But I just thought, whatever. What isn't real ever, that helped me think about it. I just put it in the slide because I wanted to show you like what happens, how this training, right? I'm thinking about training, right? Like, it's sort of my relationship to color and texture and depth as a poet, and how it's informed by my, you know, dealing with color. When is it ever really fixed? I don't know, Salcedo, Doris Salcedo's work is wonderful. Okay, chairs are not fixed, or they are fixed, like mad. Anyway, so Doris Salcedo is a Chilean, I believe, artist. Who's a Colombian? Yes, her work is really great. I mean, it's at, I don't know, it's at the, I don't know if it was the Whitney or the, That's the Guggenheim. Yeah, so I was just really invested in that work, you know, this summer. And so, and I think I was just thinking about, you know, just discovering an artist, you know, for the first time, and like slipping up, and like I love the corrective, and it was kind of like, yeah, I get it right, you know, whatever, yeah, I get it. You know, but it's this idea of like, what does it mean to be a novice, or to not know, or discover, or figure your way into something? And I'm just learning about a lot of different artists, and trying to think about like what my relationship is to, you know, to practice outside of my own field, outside of my own area, but certainly not outside of my own, you know, my own practice, my own hand. And so I think the tomato and maybe seeing Salcedo's work actually helped me think about, you know, just like sort of having a relationship to texture, I think, and being able to record it. And this was very important to me to figure out how to capture, you know, skin. I felt this need to sort of, you know, capture skin in a way, to like get the color right, or to get the color in some way. I don't know. I don't quite know how to talk about it insofar as that maybe later, I guess I was less concerned with gesture at this point, just sort of, you know, just sitting down and actually trying to make sense of the kind of work that I was, you know, engaged with in detail. And then these are sort of so early drawings, early. So I'm going to get to these images. This guy told me he was like the executor for Michael Jackson. Maybe true, I don't know. It was Oxymoron. I'll play that last. Unless you need an interlude. I might need a little interlude. Yeah, maybe we'll have a little interlude before. But I don't know if this is, let me find a fun one. Well, let me find this. Well, we should look at this one. So I spent some time, maybe this is a good way to talk about it. So I had to go to Amherst College for something. I was meeting a friend. I was teaching at Malay, so I went up to Amherst to meet a friend for lunch. And so this is at the Purple Pub, and I started working on a series called White Lives. And I started thinking about speech that said, you know, a smile, like a fly had to catch the bar, or no one thought to get you a wallet. This is in Amherst. Do you know Priscilla Morrison? She has a lake house. That's awesome. That's awesome. He's a great kid. Wow, that's festive. And then this guy had it. I just thought he had a good dunk happening. I was like, okay, whatever. It was, of course, we gave him his food money for the week. You know, all these things that happened there, and I again, you know, this is the thing that I wanted to talk about, is I began to run out of my favorite savior of the white pastel. Because, you know, with white pastel, I don't know if you people are drawing or painting or whatever, but you can do a lot with white. You know, because white is light, it's also absent, so, but when you don't have it anymore, and go figure, and again, these are sort of theoretical concerns for me, like when you don't have white anymore, what do you do? You know, that's the thing that I had to deal with, is like, okay, then I decided, you know what, I'm just going to work with no color, you know, at some point, and started to work through those. Those are early. But I want to get to these drawings really quickly. I don't know if I have time to talk about the event, but I will say that these are now in St. Louis. At the Pielzer Foundation. I was out really late doing these drawings. And I have this cheap bike, is what someone said to me. An homeless person, you know, talking about his bike. And then, you know, I was so happy to see, although segregated, it's really interesting to sort of begin to see, like, I don't know if you've been to St. Louis. Wouldn't say I know a lot about St. Louis, people are from there, but, you know, in this room. But I found it to be really interesting, like clusters of black people, clusters of white people, and just the demographics change a lot in the day and the night. It's really weird. So it's the close-up, and I will tell you, way to get there. I mean, I couldn't, some of the Nas albums I got so much I can't think. The whole show mashup gives out something. They got regular up in there. They got regular. Man, it's the same old shit. So, you know, I'm just kind of eavesdropping and drawing and thinking of these. And, you know, I don't know, I guess if I really knew how to talk about the work, but, you know, then I just started to really just deal with the line in a very particular way in which I became kind of letting in language a little bit more and started working on these. So this is getting close. I was hungry. So here we are. There's usually no parking, so I'll just end with a brief coda if we have time, or should we stop?
Go ahead.
I'll just tell you like the highlights of the coda, right? Why this, and I have to write it a little bit more, just give you highlights. Why the talk is called The Mind Holding Fat. Because on this very street, I had to break up a fight. And many other things happened before that, getting off the plane and having a white woman tell me that I shouldn't let her baby go. I was letting her baby go by, and she said, "You're not letting the baby go by." And I said, "But I did let the baby go by. I let you go by." And I told her, "Don't lie to your baby." So that happened. Like, stop institutionalizing your racism on this poor little baby. So this started happening. I got into a fight with some guy who looked like that guy from SWAT, not SWAT, but you know, he's a real estate guy, super face made up. Anyway, he's a real estate guy. He's a show. He's got really pursed face. Anyway, I said something awful to him, but that's because he just like rammed his bag over me. I said, "You should say excuse me." "I don't have to say excuse me to people like you." And I said, "You know, tighten your face, bitch." Like, I'm saying this in the middle of airports. Like, I can't control myself anymore, right? Because I'm drawing. So I'm like, you know what? Get it together, people. So I'm in St. Louis. I'm doing my little drawings. This among them. Maybe this is after the event, which I'll write about. I'll just give you the highlights of the event. So I hear this group of people, you know, arguing with one another, and I notice it's probably like a homeless man, black homeless man, and some like a white family out, and they're, you know, obviously eating or whatever, and I couldn't tell what was going on. But then all of a sudden, I realized it escalates, it gets louder and louder and louder, and here I am drawing in the middle of the street, you know, or in the middle of the siren. I look over, and suddenly it gets hot, right? It gets real hot because, you know, this man, white man, my age probably, jumps on top of the homeless man. The homeless man's trying to fight himself off with a chair. He's like, "Stop," you know, whatever. So I get up, I run across the street, and I grab this man, and I pull him off of him. You know, by this time the police are all around me, and I'm trying to explain things anyway. So the impressions that I want to write about how soft his body was, number one, and the kinds of ways in which somehow he felt like he could just throw his body into this kind of action, but was so soft. And I started thinking about the kind of complicit ways in which his body allowed his force. You know, the police are surrounding me at this moment. And of course I'm in the mood where like, look, I'm trying to work here. I'm doing drawings in the city. Handle your city. And then meanwhile, the people are going crazy, like trying to make this black, and I thought it was going to be another, you know, Michael Brown thing, so I'm going to go crazy, St. Louis, you know, I thought it was going to be just really nuts. So I thought, okay, well, so I just said, well, you know, one of the older white women in the room said, "You didn't see anything. You know, you're just doing, and I said, look, what I saw is I saw your man, whoever it was, jump on this guy. That's a problem. Then he suddenly disappears, and another, I think his friend is kind of circulating, and then begins to hold the homeless man. At some point I was holding him, you know, asking him to stop, or is he okay? Where's your man? You know, stop. And the other guy is holding the homeless man. And then I have to sort of figure out a way to diffuse the police at this moment and say, you know, he didn't do anything. And then the funny part of this story, and I'll end on this, is he says, I say to the, I said, "Who's this woman?" Because the woman's just going crazy. I said, "She's awful. Who is this woman? She's so horrible. Why is she trying?" I tell her, you're just making the situation crazier and crazier. What's going to happen in a normal situation is the police would be going crazy because they would believe you. I'm a professor. I'm here writing. And, you know, I'm trying to write this. I'm trying to do these drawings. And I'm here to tell you that he did nothing wrong. That's up to you to figure out what you guys want to figure out. You know, but you, on the other hand, are trying to escalate this into some crazy right now. And I asked them, we're all crossing the street, and I said, well, who is this who is this woman? Why is she so awful? And she said, I know, she's so awful. The young woman says, she's so awful. She's my mom. So that's that. So, but anyway, I think it's just about this idea of how does one write yourself into, you know, and again, another part of the talk would be leaving a performance and sort of having this sort of energy to fly into a situation like that. So do you want to watch a little video or you're over it?
Video.
Okay, I hope I can get the funny one. Because there's one funny one and there's one that's not so funny. They're all kind of fun, but there's one in particular that I recorded. Oh, this one is good. Now, how do I play this one? How do I, is it, Is there no...
Is the sound not working?
Is it here?
It should just play.
You'll like the song. Is it here?
It should be.
I almost brought my speakers for just a problem. Is there a way to start it from the beginning?
I can't get it to run through the audio right now. I don't know.
Here's what we'll do. From years of being a performance artist in New York, we do what we have to do. We're going to do it. So anyway, the next thing I'm working on are a series of portraits from these stills. So I have a series of these, things that I'm painting, and those I think are in conversation with some of the other drawings, these in particular. So that's it, that's all I have to say.
Would you be willing to entertain a couple of questions?
Yeah, so, yeah, sure. So they're in conversation with those black and white, those drawings, or those images. So yeah, I would love to hear some questions. It was a lot, I know, but... Balashi?
Thank you. That was wonderful. I was really thinking about freedom when you were talking, especially the kind of freedom that comes with breaking the frame and desecrating the frame, but also the ways in which right now your work is in this moment where you use the word liberating in so many different contexts, right? Where we mean to liberate from a certain kind of sense of technique or mastery, or the liberation of that kind of voyeuristic, like you're there but you're not there when you're sketching in the cafes, or even the freedom to train yourself with images like the lynching photographs that resist that kind of use, right? And can we do that with them? And so I was kind of interested in how there's a really different subjectivity that is coming out of these images because you are focusing on being free with this act. So you talk about portraiture on the one hand. There are a lot of black artists, are returning to classical portraiture traditions and then putting black images into like these 19th century like Sargent posters or paintings, right? And it's a very kind of like substitution that's unsettling and uncanny and really powerful, but you are doing something really different with your portraits, and I think it has to do with freedom and even with the fugitive. So I wonder if you could talk about how these portraits are about freedom.
Yeah, I think in some ways what I would add is also like the relationship to the mistake, right? I felt in some way with those images with the photograph, I think with drawing photographs, there's in a way a different, you're not, I guess in some ways I wonder about the collaborative relationship, you know, to the image, the photographic image of drawing, but also the sort of collaborative image in terms of would I have drawn those sorts of images had I not been thinking about how do I write a kind of poetics of loss, right? A poetics of violation, and then the rendering, the care of working through that, that sort of question, care, within the context of attempting to complete this other document, the writerly document, which I think is its own kind of containment. So when you ask about freedom, or you were thinking about freedom, I think there is something about, like, you know, moving around in the world and, you know, it's not just the images. I've been working with also sound art too, so sort of sound recordings and, you know, video, and I'm always trying to figure out a way to capture things, which, I think it's that you can't really determine what is going to happen. You don't know if, you know, you have enough, for instance, often when I was putting the slide presentation together, you know, I have no more memory on this computer, unfortunately. But that's also a certain kind of limitation. But then in a way, that restraint, you know, as in poetry, begins to form a kind of freedom of analysis or freedom of opening up. And these drawings, for instance, at some point I went back to something that I learned as a really young, you know, someone drawing in grade. I was in one art class in high school, and he would always say, make sure you, at the end of your drawings, to make sure you line everything. I thought that was interesting. So I started to do that in these drawings. And I think it's that freedom, the ability to go back to that and say, yeah, okay, I took an art class in 1987 when I was in high school, and that's the kind of freedom of hand to kind of create this work. And also, frankly, I need to think of alternative cosmologies, to borrow Ellen Gallagher, or genealogies, because I don't necessarily want to be engaged in these fights, and sort of, you know, fights around kind of prosody, poetry in a particular moment, poetry and race. You know, I had this whole thing about jealousy and envy that I was writing through too, which I don't necessarily know if I'll write through, but it's just this idea of like trying to not pay attention to these figures of the moment, but rather to look at figures of a kind of less recent moment who have not, you know, it's not as if, I mean, I hear many arguments about conceptual poetry and conceptual art, but like they're not even looking at like any single like black conceptual artist or person of color, like Doris or anyone. They're not even like naming them, or maybe they'll name them, but they're not talking about the work itself. And so I'm interested in the kind of like, how do I just, and in my paper I had to like take out names, like I'm not going to mention that person's name, like later I'll just sort of like pursue this other line. So it's a kind of freedom of maybe letting the work lead itself into another kind of ideation where there's a symbolic relationship with the argument, you know, think about Adrian Piper's Cornered series, or her box, you know, the sort of installation pieces and this installation piece and that kind of lineage. Or even, the great thing I think about writing this paper is to really remember Gwendolyn Brooks with her reports and how free those were as autobiographies. Amazing pieces, I think, in terms of, you know, what would that look like in the kind of contemporary, you know, tradition of the genre, of the memoir. Is a report from Part 1 and Part 2 sort of being, is it sort of in that, is it in the canonicity, is it within the canon of the contemporary or the memoir, right? What is it? You know, and I also love the idea of writing a report. I thought when I was younger, I said, write a report. I miss reports. I think I'm going to change this Velázquez teaches, we're going to change the creative critical dissertation to reports. We only want reports. And recitals, reports and recitals, R&R. What else? That was a good question. Any other questions? Yep, I see two hands. I'll say hand. Yes?
Thank you. I was curious to hear a little bit about the process of writing for you. So in terms of like if you would draw different subjects differently, or if you felt like you were retracing certain lines more images, just like if you say that when you're sketching and drawing the lynching images, you didn't feel a particular, you know, overly loaded over emotional draw into them. So I'm just wondering what sort of thinking was happening when you would like overload certain lines or blur out certain images, if it was like driven by the subject or what was happening for you in those movies?
That's a good question, and I think part of it is maybe it's what Balashni talked about earlier. It's like I don't think I could actually feel when I was drawing those drawings. I don't think I could actually have a kind of. I'm trying to find a particular drawing that was. You'll see the difference. It's like St. Louis, and then I flew to Venice, and you'll see the Venice drawings are like very nice because I was just eating so well. You know, and they're like a different energy, and I think part of it is the environment, right? I mean, you have like this fantastic regional wine, and then they just kind of pour you little glasses, and you know, you're on vacation. It's actually the first time I've ever taken a vacation in my life, thank you. As a person who's been on the visiting line forever, I've never had a sabbatical. So this is the very first time I actually had 10 days away to actually just disappear, and I was also working because I was looking at the Biennale, but like for instance here, you know, it's very different because when I was doing these drawings, like, it was also collaborative because the waiter or waitress would come over and say, wow, you know, that's really beautiful, what are you doing? They would have questions, it was a different, and they knew the quality of art, so it wasn't like, I don't think they just try to get a bigger tip kind of thing, or whatever, I don't know, maybe, who knows, but I think it just has to do with the kind of space I was in. Also the time, you know, I was doing those lynching drawings, you know, on my kitchen table, lovely apartment in Brooklyn, you know, it's a different sort of thing on the floor, it's a different, I had a very, very particular different experience, but I think there's something about like, you know, because I figured I knew how to learn to mess up in those lynching drawings, that I could work with color, that I figured, all right, well, I'm pretty confident that I can catch a face. I'm pretty confident that I could catch gesture, and I know I'm going to figure something that's interesting. And I'm also working, too, now with bodies of work, right? I mean, when I was doing those lynching drawings, I don't think I had a book out. I don't think I had a job. I don't think so. But now it's like I'm actively working towards, you know, archiving my work and thinking about, and this is also after I was asked to do a solo show at this gallery, which, you know, is unheard of, right? Like, I shouldn't have a solo show. Give me a break. It's like, I've never, or do you want, like, asking me shyly, would you like to do a solo exhibition with your drawings? Like, yeah? How amazing is that? What a great question. I don't know if I'm geeked out, right? But, so now I'm conscious of, like, what's going to be in the show? Am I going to, and also, like, just, I think part of it is, also, I'm photographing the images, too, so they're different when they're wet. So they have another import. So I think maybe what I'm getting at is like, I'm pretty much preoccupied with certain aesthetic concerns, you know, and also what it feels like to be making something beautiful in a beautiful place, in your own body, right? I think that's very important for me, you know, just sort of doing this work and trying to feel above board and not apologetic about it, you know. So I don't know if that quite gets at your question.
No, it really does, thank you.
Great. Francis, and then, I don't know here, but, or did you want, either way?
Go ahead.
Yeah, I had a question, I guess, about documentation.
Mm-hmm.
And I find that sometimes if I'm keeping a notebook or a journal or something of that nature, and this can be writing or drawing, but sometimes it tends to mix together for me at least, is what ends up getting face down out of any period of time is somehow at a total disjuncture at times with what you're experiencing, or what the sort of primary events later you might label of that period might be. So I'm curious if you feel like there's anything you do that helps a process of documentation, or if maybe that arbitrariness of what ends up landing on the page is part of the process, or what do you feel about kind of the historical periods of your own life or that you're living through, and the sort of that relationship to what ends up actually making it to a page or to a notebook?
Yeah, well, I mean, these sort of everything, or maybe a way to think of it is like what makes it into this presentation, right? And I think sort of most of the drawings, you know, some of them just were like so bad that I couldn't, which I wouldn't mind showing you really terrible ones. These are probably terrible too if you're making work and you know how to make art. But I will say that I mean, I was trying to find one image in particular where the coda that I talked about is the man who I, you know, helped on the street, or who helped me, actually. We helped one another. He came up to me and he asked me for money. And then later he came up and he said, "Weren't you that guy who pulled that guy off of me?" You know, but I had written that something down, you know, at that moment, because I wanted to record when that interaction happened. I don't know what its relationship is to in the drawing, but I think part of it is, I think more so than the writing, very conscious of really being able to go back to the feeling of that time, much more than in a journal. Like, I know exactly what I was feeling when I saw this woman with the drawings. You know, with the writing, I think, and that's one of the things one of the things I was trying to do this summer was, you know, I was thinking about feeling so fragmented, having such a crazy, I just got tenure, all these things had happened, and I wanted to travel, but also I couldn't read my own writing. So that was disturbing to me, because I thought, how can you not read your own writing? Like, what does that say about you? And so I started thinking about just working in penmanship, and then I decided to start drawing again. So, but part of it is a way of recognizing what I see in a particular moment. I actually think I have more of I think, you know, but for practical reasons I became a professor and a poet, but in my real life I would be a straight up visual artist. Because I know actually I feel more, or I have that relationship to the world more, but I have to have a job. Or I always thought that. So language works in that way for me. But I think there is something that has been blowing my mind a little bit about how very present I am in capturing and feeling certain, like, oh my God, you sort of fall in love with people. You know, that's the thing that's really quite amazing, you know. You know, you just, and children, you know, because they're so hard to capture, you know, so there's something about like wanting just that little moment, you're in that world, just trying to get that. So I think there is something, I think for me, the sort of visual cues are a bit more weighted in terms of my memory or feeling of the experience, or even in time. You know, I think, rather than the writing, you know, or at least this time. In some ways, maybe the drawing is actually trying to get me to get back to that time when I was very present with the writing. But again, you know, there's such high stakes for my writing. You know, it goes into a little file. It gets up for a book. It's, you know, it's not like drawing. It's like, who knows, you know? But I do. At this show, I'm selling. I'm trying to get price points. Mama needs new shoes. Do not get it twisted. Sorry, I get accused of being materialist, and I am. I love materials. So what else? Oh, Tanya and Francis. I think.
Okay, I was going to ask something about the conceptual body being abjected, because abjection, as classically defined, is about total embodiment, total materiality, right? That's the problem with abjection, is that it's not conceptual. The corpse isn't conceptual, it's really dead. So when it's the conceptual body that's objected, what happens to the real body is somehow my question. Or where does the real body, the body that stepped into the fight, that could have gotten punched, the body of the man who was wielding the chair and being attacked, real flesh on flesh is happening there. But the envelope for understanding it, or the idiom for looking at it, is not only abject, but conceptual, the way the eyes and lips in an Ellen Gallagher painting are conceptual, or the way a William Cobell character is conceptual. Those aren't autobiographical in some direct sense, or performative of the literal body. They're performative of an idea of the body. So just thinking about how those things, that fleshliness and the emergency of real touch relates to an alienated or distanced or conceptualized or historicized existence, and how the object is the glue between them, and that's maybe that's too confusing.
No, I mean, it's complicated. I think it's really complicated. I will say that I think maybe the sort of kind of way into that question has to do with the sort of stakes of performance, right? I mean, because one can think, you know, what is the real body, the abject body, and also what is the sort of the corpus of the work? I mean, those are the sort of things I'm thinking about too, in terms of how does the body of the work maneuver around disciplining or meeting that subject in order to allow for, you know, whatever to pass, whether it's safety or, I think for me what I'm sort of interested in too is kind of the expectations of abjection, right? And particularly around, you know, I will just say, like bodies who travel, you know, black bodies that travel, that are moving. I know that that's often, you know, it's, you know, I was thinking, you know, being in St. Louis actually for the first time in my life saying good morning to people and people not saying hello back or good morning back in a long time. I lived in the South, but like, you know, walking down to older white people with their dogs and stuff, you know, could be the Upper East Side. But I just didn't feel compelled to, you don't really, it's not New York where you're like, hey, morning, but there's something about that, you know, St. Louis or whatever. But it's the idea of, wow, you know, I was actually rendered completely I was like, oh, okay, they think I'm that homeless man that I got. That's what they think. They think that I'm on a hustle. That's why you can't, and same way I wouldn't talk to a homeless person in New York at times, because you're on the hustle, you're getting ixnayed. You know, I got to move. But to be on the other side of that, as someone who's invited to the Fields Foundation, I don't know if it was enraging, but it was also something about it was maybe to think about the kinds of ways in which abjection, you know, maneuvers both at the side of, I say this because I'm interested in, you know, sort of what it means to perform as a flyer, a visitor, you know, someone on a plane. There's a certain way in which I actually have to, well, I don't know if I have to, but there's a way in which I have to perform a kind of non-abjection, I think. Or sometimes I don't even care. Like, I really don't care. But sometimes I do. But I think it's just the idea that sometimes asks me to think about the stakes are really high. Now, I wonder about that in relationship to a body of work that I'm presenting, you know, and also all the spaces in between, like, how is it, what is my relationship to abjection, the abject black body? I'm clearly not abject, but maybe I am in some ways. You know, so I guess what I'm trying to get at is I wonder about that in relationship to the leakages around when performance becomes rendered real, right? So in that instance, I think it was because I could sort of speak in a particular way and I was disciplining. And also the next day, which I'm writing about, is when the report came out in St. Louis around the behavior of the police. That was the next day this had come out. So that was something that, you know, to think about too. So.
Maybe one more question?
Sure.
Tanya?
Hi, Tanya.
I have a much more simple question, and I was wondering, I was curious about your description of taking stills from the video and rendering those as a kind of still life. I wonder what's translated into each of these modes and from each of those modes.
Oh,
Writing to.
Yeah, just, you know, it's, you know, I once, you know, I started to look a little bit more at Caleb Lindsay's work, and, you know, I was listening to, do you know Caleb Lindsay's a wonderful performance artist, filmmaker, young African-American queer, really crazy. If you want to laugh hysterically, you should look at some Caleb Lindsay. Anyway, he talks about these scenes and how ultimately he's composing each shot. So for me, it's just an opportunity to compose. I will say that, you know, that's something that just concerns me. So if I'm shooting a video, I'll know what sort of shape or what compositional frame. I don't know where it's going to lead next. I just think it will be a fun opportunity to do some beautiful paintings, you know, and sit with those images. And I guess maybe that is the arc, is to think about, you know, what is the relationship between, again, it's the question I was asked by Michelle Wallace and Mina Alexander at my dissertation defense was, you know, I was writing about Hilton Knowles, and Michelle had asked, you know, your body, you're very different than Hilton. He's really large, he's really big, you know, African-American guy, he's really big, and, you know, you're not. And I started thinking about that. What is my relationship to my text? what is my relationship to like the still body, my own, you know, so I think because I have the ability and the desire to work in self-portraiture, particularly insofar as, you know, that's a no-no for an academic, particularly a black academic, right? Like you can't, you have to be self-effacing, you can't, there's certain things you can't do, but the idea of what does it mean to just do portraiture and to give face, you know what I mean? Because I come from, I think that's a lot, I think part of what I'm attempting to do in the work is to kind of, you know, to offer that, you know, that kind of, you know, shade, but not shading. You know, I may not want to say something, but I will perform in a hoodie and write the hoodie out, and like the hoodie's, you know, there's certain things I'll do to approximate the argument that I want. So maybe it's a kind of ideation that I'm getting at. So it is a complicated question. It's like, what are the ways you can get around to the answer? You know, to the answer, because I think that there's a problem with the expectation that my answer should be direct, that you should look to me to solve your sort of political woes. It's like, I will be spinning on my garage floor. That's my answer to your, you know, call. You know, and what is that twerking? What is that turning? It goes back to Eileen Myles, that unpredictability. You know, I'm a poet, I'm an artist, this is what I do. My job is not to mediate. So I'm just thinking about how to do that as a critic while I'm relatively young, so I don't get called on to be that kind of person. You know, I'm busy, you know. But thank you. Thank you very much for indulging me and for your wonderful questions.
Thank you, Ronaldo. Thank you, audience. And in about 20 minutes, Positive Knowledge will perform in this very room. So stick around for that, and Ronaldo will be back for reading it at 6:30. Thank you again.